A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. The apostles returned from their mission. They gathered around Jesus and told him all they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns and arrived ahead of them. As Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. The Gospel of the Lord. There's a beautiful line in the second reading today that one could spend a whole week or a whole lifetime contemplating the meaning of it. Jesus is our peace. He who made both one and broke down the dividing wall through his flesh, abolishing the law with its commandments and legal claims, that he might create in himself one new person in place of the two, thus establishing peace. This is really fascinating. So peace is not just a state of mind or body, and reconciliation and forgiveness is not just something we do or do not do. Peace is actually a person. Forgiveness is a person, and that person is Christ, who is the Lord of peace and the Prince of mercy. The writer and poet Alice Camille tells of an incident in her life that brought this kind of personal dimension of peace home to her. She says, "There was no way I was going to speak to that guy who offended me ever again. No way. I repeated this mantra several times to fortify my resolve. I was outraged. I was hurting. As I rehearsed for the 20th time the righteousness of my position against my enemy who had offended me, then I remembered peace wasn't something that was mine to give or deny. Jesus is our peace. Jesus is the way of peace. Unity with him is unity with peace and reconciliation. To withhold reconciliation is to withhold Christ and what Christ can do. The balance between reflection and action, prayer and good works, work and rest, comes into focus in this weekend's gospel. It's often hard to get that balance right in our lives. So many demands of our time, many good projects that can be called on us. And so the balance of work, rest, prayer, action is quite challenging. Our Lord knew this balance was difficult, and he responded and was flexible and even changed his plans when situations unexpectedly arose. But at the same time, there's a deep sense about Jesus that he kept the balance within his heart and was able to be peaceful and loving in his response despite the many demands. Jesus knew the benefit of taking some time to get away from it all and revive, to rest, pray, and have time to nourish ourselves in body, spirit, and mind. He showed that care for himself and his disciples was important, even in the midst of the heavy demands of his ministry, whilst facing crushing needs of countless people who came to see him, hear him, and to touch him. Their need was so great. Among the natural benefits of taking time out is renewal and physical and spiritual recuperation. There's also the valuable chance to stop, take a breath, and look where we are. Look where we're heading and what we're trying to achieve. If we constantly respond only to the urgent, we may miss getting a chance to weigh up whether it's also important. This was something that came as a bit of a shock and a revelation to me, that something can be urgent but not necessarily important. And that's a wonderful insight. Some of the most important things in life may not present themselves to us as urgent, but if neglected, these needs could cause major difficulties and even cause us to lose sight of the things that really matter. Also, we believe that our God can be encountered in the silence, in the stillness, so we must make time for that silence and stillness. I'm impressed by the quote from St. Teresa, which says, "Settle yourself in solitude, and you will come upon him in yourself. Another really striking thing about today's gospel passage is that although Jesus knew he needed to get away from it all and give himself and his disciples time to eat, to rest, and to pray, and to gain renewal and focus, with this in mind, his attitude towards the needy crowds when he saw them is important and inspiring. He gets to the place where he's heading for a well-deserved rest, only to find the crowds have found their way here too. We could be forgiven in some way if in exasperation we reacted in a similar situation by saying, "Oh, please, give me a break. Go away, I'm tired. I'm too tired to do anything. Leave me alone." But of course, our Lord's reaction is not that. Our Lord's reaction is the same as what many parents and carers would also do when they're faced with the all too real needs of their beloved. It's a response of love, of deep compassion and inclusion. Christ understands them. He knew their needs and he could see into their hearts. He did not see the crowds as if they were nothing to do with him. They were never just people he spoke to and taught and then switched off. They had a connection to him and he to them. These needy people, these crowds, were not disconnected from him. He identified himself with the people. He was like a parent to a child, like a spouse to their beloved. This was not a case of them and us when it came to relating to the crowd. Christ's attitude to his ministry wasn't like the proverbial shop assistant who would say, "This job would be really good if it wasn't for all these customers." No, Jesus was fully immersed in what he was on about. Jesus' compassionate reaction to the crowd was because, although he wasn't denying his needs, he knew them too well, and he knew his disciples' needs too for rest, prayer, and reflection. But when he came across the crowds, he recognized their needs as also important. That's such an important key point. All of these needs are important, no doubt, and denying one over the other is not the solution, but finding a way to meet all of them as best one can. So for our Lord, it was always a case of not them and us, but us and us. His needs and the needs of his disciples were as important as the needs of the crowds, and the crowd's needs were as real and important to him as his own. He kept that in his mind and, more importantly, in his heart. And his response reflected that. He solved the slightly conflicting needs, equally important, by responding in compassion to the lost and desperate needs of those he encountered. And I'm sure after that, he went off and gave himself and his disciples the space they needed afterwards.